The galaxy screamed for salvation. Earth replied with blades and burn. The distress beacon pierced through the cosmic void like a dying scream, its signal carrying the desperation of 17 star systems. Ambassador Rena Nomura stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, her weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the emergency displays. For 43 years, she had served as humanity's voice in the Galactic Consortium, watching as Earth's children slowly earned their place among the stars. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Ambassador," called Commander Ryuk Valthorn from across the communication center. The tall Zarathi officer's crystalline skin flickered with stress patterns, casting prismatic light across his angular features. His species had evolved on a world of living crystal, developing technology that merged organic growth with mineral precision. The Hegemony Council is requesting immediate human consultation. Rena turned from the viewport where the lights of 1,000 species ships dotted the darkness. The irony wasn't lost on her. For decades, the consortium had treated humanity as useful primitives, good for manual labor and security work, but too violent for true leadership roles. Now they were begging for Earth's help. "Show me the recordings," she said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. The holographic display activated, filling the air with images that defied comprehension. Entire orbital cities hung in space like broken toys, their gleaming surfaces scarred by wounds that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The footage came from the Kythera system, once home to 12 billion beings across 7 species. "The attacks began 3 standard weeks ago," Ryuk explained, his voice modulated by the translation matrix. "No warnings, no demands, no communication attempts. The entity simply appeared and began systematic destruction." Rena watched in horror as massive forms moved through the debris fields. The attackers looked like living shadows given form, their surfaces absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They moved with predatory grace, tearing through defensive positions with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. "Energy signatures are completely unknown," continued another voice from behind them. Dr. Nova Brightwater, the consortium's leading xenobiologist, approached with data tablets clutched in her 6-fingered hands. The Aquarian scientist's gill slits fluttered with agitation, a sign of extreme stress in her species. "Whatever these things are, they don't follow any known physical laws. Our plasma weapons pass right through them, particle beams have no effect, and gravitational manipulation only seems to make them stronger." "What about evacuation efforts?" Rena asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. 17 systems have gone completely dark," Ryuk reported. "Population estimates suggest over 40 billion sentient beings have been killed, consumed, or converted." The word "converted" hung in the air like a curse. Rena had seen the preliminary reports, survivors describing friends and family members being transformed into something else, their consciousness remaining intact, but their bodies becoming extensions of the shadow entities. "The Hegemony Council has authorized the release of restricted technologies," Dr. Brightwater said quietly. "Quantum disruptors, temporal weapons, even the dreaded reality anchors. Nothing works. These entities adapt to energy-based attacks within minutes, sometimes seconds." Rena closed her eyes and thought about Earth. Humanity's homeworld was considered a death trap by most galactic standards. A planet where the weather could kill you, the animals hunted in coordinated packs, and even the microscopic life forms engaged in constant warfare. The consortium had spent centuries trying to civilize humanity, banning most of Earth's military technologies as unnecessarily brutal. "What does the Council want from us?" she asked, though she already knew. "Unconventional warfare consultation," Ryuk answered. "The High Command believes that humanity's unique approach to conflict might provide insights our traditional military doctrine cannot." Rena almost laughed. For 300 years, the galaxy had told humans that their weapons were primitive, their tactics barbaric, their entire approach to conflict hopelessly outdated. Chemical explosives were considered crude compared to energy weapons. Kinetic projectiles were seen as wasteful when particle beams could be infinitely recycled. And the human concept of fighting dirty was deemed unworthy of civilized species. But now, with 40 billion beings dead and an unstoppable enemy consuming the galaxy, suddenly humanity's primitive ways seemed worth considering. I need to contact Earth Command, Rena said. This is beyond my authority to approve. 3 hours later, Rena stood in the secure communication chamber, facing a hologram of General Kane Steelridge. The old soldier's face bore the scars of humanity's violent rise to the stars, a career that had taken him from the gang wars of Neo-Jakarta to the corporate conflicts of the Jupiter colonies. His steel gray eyes held the kind of hardness that only came from making impossible decisions. So, the galaxy's apex predators want lessons from us knuckle-draggers, Steelridge said, his voice carrying equal parts amusement and disgust. Tell me, Ambassador, how many times did the Council vote to restrict our weapon systems? 17 times in the last decade alone, Rena admitted. But this is different, Kane. We're talking about the extinction of galactic civilization. Are we? Steelridge leaned back in his chair, studying reports that scrolled across his personal display. Or are we talking about the galaxy finally learning that their pretty energy weapons and polite warfare don't work against everything in the universe? The General's aide, Colonel Victoria Ramirez, stepped into the hologram's range. Her dark eyes held the same intensity as her commander's, but tempered with strategic thinking that had made her one of Earth's finest tacticians. General, the preliminary data suggests these entities operate outside normal space-time parameters, if they reach the inner systems. Billions more die, Steelridge finished. I know the math, Colonel. He turned back to Rena. What exactly is the Council offering in exchange for our help? Full military partnership, Rena replied. Unrestricted access to consortium technology databases, joint command authority, and formal recognition of human military doctrine as a legitimate strategic philosophy. Steelridge was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. They're scared, he said finally. More scared than they've ever been. All right, Ambassador. Tell the Council that humanity accepts their invitation to the party, but we do this our way, with our people, using our methods. The Council may object to some of our tactics, Rena warned. Then they can watch from the sidelines while their galaxy burns, Steelridge replied coldly. We've tried playing by their rules for 3 centuries. Time to show them why Earth breeds survivors. The call ended, leaving Rena alone with her thoughts. She had just committed humanity to a war against an enemy that had effortlessly destroyed the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But as she looked out at the stars, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding ways to kill things that seemed unkillable. The EDS Ragnarok materialized at the edge of the Valtara system, like a mechanical predator entering new territory. Captain Rex Thornfield stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship, watching as his crew ran final system checks. Unlike the sleek, elegant vessels favored by consortium species, the Ragnarok looked like what it was: a weapon built for war. Sensor report, Thornfield called to his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Arya Blackstone's fingers danced across her console, analyzing data streams that painted a grim picture. Multiple contacts, Captain. I'm reading at least 30 shadow entities moving through the outer asteroid belt. They're feeding on something. The main view screen activated, showing the aftermath of what had once been a thriving mining operation. Massive installations that had housed thousands of workers were now twisted ruins, their metal structures partially dissolved and reformed in shapes that hurt to look at. The shadow entities moved among the wreckage like sharks through a reef, their dark forms pulsing with absorbed energy. Jesus, whispered Chief Engineer Pablo Santos from his position at the engineering station. The burly man had seen combat in the Titan Wars and the Jovian conflicts, but nothing had prepared him for this. What the hell are those things? Unknown, replied Dr. Zendicano, the ship's xenobiology specialist. Her analytical mind was already working to categorize and understand their enemy. Preliminary scans suggest they exist partially outside normal space-time. They appear to be consuming not just matter and energy, but dimensional stability itself. Thornfield studied the tactical display, his mind working through possibilities. As one of Earth's most experienced combat commanders, he had faced impossible odds before. But this was different, an enemy that couldn't be hurt by conventional weapons, that grew stronger with each attack, that converted victims into extensions of itself. Signal from the consortium fleet, reported Communications Officer Dylan Cross. Admiral Zeftar is requesting immediate conference. Put him through, Thornfield ordered. The holographic display shimmered, revealing the imposing figure of the draconic military commander. Admiral Zeftar's reptilian features bore the scars of countless battles, and his golden eyes held the wisdom of centuries. His species had once been the galaxy's premier warriors, before 300 years of peace had softened their edge. Captain Thornfield, Zeftar began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. My fleet has been engaged with the shadow entities for 6 hours. We have achieved 0 effective hits while losing 3 capital ships and 12 escort vessels. Your unconventional expertise is urgently needed. What have you tried? Thornfield asked bluntly. Everything in our arsenal, Zeftar replied with bitter frustration. Plasma bombardment, quantum torpedoes, gravitational manipulation, even experimental time dilation weapons. The entities absorb energy attacks and use them to grow stronger. Kinetic weapons pass through them as if they were made of smoke. Thornfield exchanged glances with his senior staff. The galaxy's most advanced military couldn't scratch these things, but humanity hadn't survived Earth by relying on advanced technology. They had survived by being stubborn, adaptable, and willing to do whatever was necessary to win. Admiral, I need you to pull your fleet back to minimum safe distance, Thornfield ordered. We're going to try something different. What do you have in mind? Zeftar asked. Something the galaxy calls primitive warfare, Thornfield replied with a grim smile. Time to show these shadows what happens when you mess with humanity's neighborhood. The Ragnarok moved through space with predatory efficiency, its crew preparing for a battle unlike any in human history. In the weapons bay, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Cole supervised the loading of humanity's most forbidden weapons. Chemical explosives, biological agents, and kinetic penetrators that had been banned by 16 different consortium treaties. Load the special packages, Cole ordered his team. If these things want to play with dimensional physics, let's see how they handle good old-fashioned chemistry. The special packages were humanity's darkest secret, weapons that attack the fundamental forces holding matter together. The consortium had banned them after the Proxima incident, but Earth had never stopped manufacturing them. Now, faced with an enemy that laughed at energy weapons, it was time to break out the really nasty stuff. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Lydia Chen worked frantically to prepare for casualties that would be unlike anything in medical literature. The shadow entities didn't just kill, they transformed their victims into something else entirely. Understanding that process might be the key to stopping them. Captain, called Lieutenant Commander Blackstone from Tactical, the entities have detected our approach. They're moving to intercept. On the main screen, the shadow entities began to coalesce into a formation that suggested intelligence beyond mere animal cunning. They moved with purpose, coordinating their movements in ways that indicated shared consciousness or sophisticated communication. Range to target? Thornfield asked. 50,000 kilometers and closing, Blackstone replied. Energy signatures are spiking. They're charging some kind of weapon system. Let them come, Thornfield said calmly. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage an enemy that has destroyed 17 star systems and 40 billion sentient beings. They think they're unstoppable because they've only faced civilized opponents. Today, they learn what uncivilized looks like. Battle stations. The shadows attacked with weapons that bent reality itself. Space twisted around the Ragnarok as dimensional distortions tried to tear the ship apart. Energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck the hull, causing damage that spread backward through time. But the Earth ship had been built to survive in a universe that wanted to kill it, and humanity had learned long ago that the best defense was a good offense. Fire Package Alpha, Thornfield ordered. The first salvo consisted of weapons that shouldn't have worked against interdimensional entities. Chemical warheads filled with compounds that had been designed to disrupt exotic matter. Kinetic penetrators made from metals that existed in quantum superposition. And at the center of the barrage, humanity's most horrific creation. A weapon that attacked the very concept of existence itself. The shadow entities reacted with what could only be described as surprise. Their graceful formation broke apart as they tried to analyze and adapt to weapons that operated on principles they had never encountered. The chemical explosions created tears in space-time that bled energy in ways that confused their absorption mechanisms. The kinetic weapons passed through their dimensional defenses and struck their core matrices with devastating effect. Direct hits across multiple targets, Blackstone reported with amazement. The entities are destabilizing. 3 shadow entities writhed in space as their dark forms began to break apart. But instead of dying, they began to change, adapting to the new threat with frightening speed. Their surfaces hardened against chemical attack, and their dimensional matrices shifted to deflect kinetic weapons. They're learning, Dr. Nakano observed from her science station. Adaptation time is approximately 47 seconds for complete immunity. Then we don't give them 47 seconds, Thornfield replied grimly. Fire package beta. The second barrage was completely different from the first. Biological weapons that attacked the quantum fields holding the entities together. Gravitational mines that created localized space-time anomalies. And most surprisingly effective of all, simple nuclear warheads that release energy in patterns too chaotic for the entities to absorb efficiently. The battle became a desperate race between human ingenuity and alien adaptation. Each weapon package bought precious minutes before the entities developed immunity. But those minutes allowed the human crew to learn, to adapt, to develop new strategies. "Captain," called Chief Santos from engineering, "I've got an idea. These things absorb and redirect energy, right? What if we gave them more than they could handle?" "Explain," Thornfield ordered while watching another entity adapt to their latest weapon. "Overload cascade," Santos replied excitedly. "We hit them with every type of energy at once. Plasma, particle beams, gravitational waves, dimensional distortions, nuclear radiation, even old-fashioned radio waves. Their adaptation systems won't be able to process that much conflicting data." "Do it," Thornfield ordered. The Ragnarok unleashed hell in every conceivable frequency and dimension. The ship's weapon systems, pushed beyond their design limits, created an energy storm that lit up space like a miniature star. The shadow entities, caught in the cascade, began to convulse as their adaptation systems overloaded trying to process the chaos. But the victory was short-lived. More entities began emerging from the wreckage of the mining stations, and these ones had already adapted to the overload technique by observing their fellows' destruction. "Sir," reported Cross from communications, "we're receiving a transmission from inside one of the entities." "Put it through," Thornfield ordered, dreading what he might hear. The voice that emerged from the speakers was human, but changed in ways that made everyone on the bridge shudder. "This is Commander Patricia Wells of the mining station Aurora. I'm still alive in here. They don't kill us, Captain. They absorb us. Use our knowledge, our memories. I can feel them learning from every weapon you fire." The revelation sent chills through the crew. The entities weren't just adapting through observation. They were incorporating the knowledge and experience of their victims. Every person they consumed made them smarter, more capable, more dangerous. "Commander Wells," Thornfield said carefully, "can you tell us anything about their weaknesses?" "They fear chaos," Wells' distorted voice replied. "Pattern, predictability, logic, these things make them stronger. But chaos, true randomness, it hurts them. They can't adapt to something that has no pattern to analyze." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Then Lieutenant Commander Blackstone spoke up with grim determination. "Captain, I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "Try me," Thornfield replied. "Human warfare has always been built on controlled chaos," Blackstone explained. "Every great human victory has come from doing something so unpredictable, so seemingly insane, that the enemy couldn't prepare for it. What if we took that to its logical extreme?" Thornfield understood immediately. "You want to weaponize insanity." "Not insanity," Blackstone corrected. "Pure human unpredictability. We coordinate with the consortium fleet and launch attacks that make no tactical sense. Use weapons in ways they were never designed for. Fight a battle that follows no known military doctrine." Dr. Nakano looked up from her readings with excitement. "It could work. The entity's adaptation requires them to analyze and understand attack patterns. If there's no pattern to analyze, they can't adapt. Thornfield finished. All right, people, time to show the galaxy what human warfare really looks like when we take the gloves off. The next phase of the battle defied every principle of military science. Human ships attacked their own positions to confuse the enemy. Weapons designed for planetary bombardment were fired backward to create gravitational slingshots. The Ragnarok itself performed maneuvers that should have torn the ship apart, using the stress as a weapon against entities that tried to predict its movement. Admiral Zeftar watched from his flagship in amazement as the human tactics began to work. The shadow entities, faced with attacks that made no logical sense, began to falter. Their perfect adaptation systems, evolved over eons to counter organized warfare, couldn't cope with the beautiful insanity of human combat doctrine. All consortium vessels, Zeftar broadcast, follow the humans' lead, abandon conventional tactics, fight like they do, without pattern, without logic, without fear of looking foolish. The combined fleet began the strangest battle in galactic history. Draconic ships fired their weapons while spinning out of control. Crystalline vessels used their precision instruments to create chaotic interference patterns. Even the peaceful Aquarian explorers began ramming attacks that made no strategic sense, but somehow worked perfectly. The shadow entities, for the first time in their existence, began to retreat. Faced with opponents who fought like madmen but with deadly effectiveness, they withdrew from the Valtara system, leaving behind the twisted remains of their feeding ground. But the victory came at a cost. The Ragnarok had pushed its systems beyond all limits, and half the ship's crew needed medical attention from the strain of impossible maneuvers. Worse, the entities hadn't been destroyed, merely driven away, and they would adapt, learn from this encounter, become harder to defeat. In the aftermath of the battle, Captain Thornfield stood in the observation lounge with Admiral Zeftar, watching as rescue ships searched for survivors among the wreckage. The Draconic commander's golden eyes held new respect for the human species. "Your people fight like demons," Zeftar said quietly. "No strategy, no elegance, just pure destructive chaos. He paused, searching for words. "It's terrifying and beautiful at the same time." "We fight like humans," Thornfield corrected. "And that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now. These entities have spent eons learning to counter civilized warfare, but they've never faced Earth before." "What happens now?" Zeftar asked. "The entities will adapt to what we did today. This tactic won't work forever." Thornfield smiled grimly. "Then we'll come up with new tactics. That's what humans do. We adapt faster than our enemies, think dirtier than our opponents, and refuse to quit when any sane species would surrender." The galaxy wanted to know what human warfare looked like. This was just the warm-up. As if summoned by his words, new alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. Long-range sensors were detecting massive movement in the deep void. Hundreds of shadow entities converging on the inner systems. The real battle was just beginning. The war room aboard Harmony Station had been transformed into a strategic nerve center, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from 17 species worked alongside human military advisors, creating battle plans that merged 3 centuries of galactic military wisdom with Earth's hardest-earned lessons in survival warfare. Ambassador Rena Nomura stood at the central holotable, watching as tactical displays showed the enemy's inexorable advance. The shadow entities had learned from the defeated Valtara, adapting not just their defenses, but their entire strategic approach. They no longer attacked randomly. They were coordinating a systematic assault on the galaxy's most populated systems. "Intelligence reports confirm our worst fears," announced Colonel Victoria Ramirez, now serving as Chief Tactical Advisor to the combined forces. "The entities are demonstrating advanced strategic thinking. They're hitting communication nodes, supply lines, and defensive positions in sequence. This isn't random feeding behavior. This is warfare." Dr. Nova Brightwater manipulated the holographic display, highlighting energy patterns that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. The entities consumed the military databases of 7 different species at Kythera. They now understand conventional galactic warfare better than we do. Every standard tactic, every traditional strategy, Every classical formation is now useless against them. General Kane Steelridge, who had arrived from Earth aboard the dreadnought EDS Warhammer, studied the tactical situation with the cold calculation of a lifetime soldier. "Then we don't use standard tactics," he said simply. "We give them something they've never seen before." "With respect, General," interjected High Admiral Kethmore of the Aquarian Deep Fleet, his translator struggling with the emotional undertones of his species' language, "human military doctrine has achieved impressive results in isolated engagements. But this is galactic warfare on a scale beyond anything Earth has experienced." Steelridge's steel-gray eyes fixed on the Aquarian commander with predatory intensity. "Admiral, my species fought a world war with atomic weapons before we invented spaceflight. We've been preparing for extinction-level conflict since we learned to make fire. Scale doesn't intimidate us, it just means we get to kill more enemies." The room fell silent as the implications of the general's words sank in. Most galactic species had achieved interstellar travel through peaceful cooperation and technological advancement. Humanity had clawed its way to the stars through violence, competition, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "The entities are currently consuming the Helix Nebula colonies," reported Commander Ryuk Veilthorn, his crystalline features reflecting the grim tactical displays. "Population density exceeds 30 billion across 12 worlds. If they complete absorption there, they'll have incorporated the memories and knowledge of 30 billion beings," finished Dr. Zen Nakano, who had been analyzing captured entity fragments aboard the Ragnarok. "Their collective intelligence will increase exponentially. They'll become unstoppable." Rena looked around the room at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. These beings had created wonders beyond human imagination. Cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres, consciousness transfers that allowed immortality, technologies that could restructure matter at the quantum level, but none of them knew how to fight a war where the enemy grew stronger with every victory. "How long until they reach the Helix colonies?" she asked. 14 hours at current velocity, Ryuk replied. Steelridge moved to the tactical display, his scarred hands manipulating force dispositions with practiced efficiency. "We need to hit them before they finish feeding. Once they absorb those 30 billion minds, they'll be too smart to defeat with chaos tactics." "The combined fleet can't reach the Helix Nebula in time," Admiral Zeftar pointed out. "Even if we could, our last engagement proved that conventional fleet actions are ineffective against these entities." "Then we don't fight them conventionally," Steelridge said with a smile that made several alien commanders uncomfortable. "We fight them like humans." The plan that emerged from the next 6 hours of intensive planning was so audacious that it bordered on insanity. Rather than engaging the shadow entities in traditional fleet combat, the combined forces would scatter across the galaxy, striking randomly at targets that made no strategic sense. The goal wasn't to win decisive battles, but to create so much chaos that the entities couldn't predict where the next attack would come from. "Guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale," Colonel Ramirez explained to the assembled commanders. "We turn the entire galaxy into a battlefield where every system, every asteroid, every piece of space junk becomes a potential weapon." The alien commander struggled to understand the concept. Galactic warfare had always been about territorial control, resource management, and decisive engagements between organized fleets. The idea of abandoning territory to fight from hidden positions was alien to their thinking. "You're suggesting we give up our most valuable systems and fight like bandits," protested Admiral Kethmore. "We're suggesting we survive," Steelridge replied coldly. "Your civilized warfare got 40 billion beings killed in 3 weeks. Time to try something uncivilized." The first phase of Operation Wildfire began with the systematic evacuation of major population centers. Unlike the orderly planned evacuations favored by Galactic Protocol, this was pure human-style emergency response. Merchant vessels, military transports, and even private craft were pressed into service, moving civilians to hidden bases in empty systems and hostile environments. Captain Rex Thornfield found himself commanding not just the Ragnarok, but an entire wolf pack of modified civilian vessels. His task force included everything from luxury cruise ships fitted with torpedo launchers to mining vessels armed with industrial-grade explosives. "Sir, this is insane," observed Chief Engineer Pablo Santos as they watched a luxury liner practice attack runs against asteroid targets. Half these crews have never fired a weapon in anger. Then they're about to get an education, Thornfield replied. The entities expect to face military vessels with trained crews following established doctrines. They won't know what to make of civilians fighting like professionals and professionals fighting like madmen. The shadow entity's response to the evacuation was swift and brutal. They accelerated their advance, consuming 3 minor systems in rapid succession as they tried to catch the fleeing populations. But each system they attacked was empty, its resources already stripped away or rigged with explosive charges that detonated as the entities tried to feed. Phase 1 is working, reported Lieutenant Commander Arya Blackstone from the Ragnarok's tactical station. The entities are wasting energy on empty systems, but they're adapting faster than projected. Intelligence estimates they'll figure out our evacuation patterns within 48 hours. Then we move to Phase 2, Thornfield ordered. Phase 2 was pure human viciousness. Asymmetric warfare designed to turn the entities' own strengths against them. Instead of fighting the shadow entities directly, human-led forces began attacking the infrastructure they needed to survive. Dimensional anchor points were sabotaged to destabilize local space-time. Energy-rich gas clouds were seeded with exotic matter that created violent chain reactions when consumed. Even abandoned space stations were turned into traps, their reactors rigged to overload when the entities tried to absorb them. Dr. Lydia Chen, now aboard the command ship Harmony's Edge, coordinated the biological warfare aspects of the campaign. Her team had developed weapons that attacked the quantum fields holding the entities together, not to destroy them directly, but to force them to expend energy, maintaining coherence. The entities are showing signs of strain, she reported during a strategy session held in the depths of an abandoned asteroid mine. Their adaptation systems are being forced to work overtime. Each new weapon type we introduce forces them to allocate computational resources to analysis and defense. Like running a computer virus, observed Dr. Nakano, who had been studying the entity's behavioral patterns. We're not trying to crash their systems, we're just making them run so many background processes that they can't function efficiently. The galaxy began to transform as the war progressed. Peaceful trade routes became kill zones where modified freighters ambushed entity scouts. Scientific research stations were converted into weapons laboratories, producing exotic armaments that violated dozens of interstellar treaties. Even the most pacifist species found themselves learning the human art of making everyday objects into instruments of destruction. But the entities were learning too. Each encounter, each new weapon, each tactical innovation was analyzed and countered. They began to exhibit behaviors that suggest not just intelligence, but genuine creativity. They started setting traps of their own, using their shape-shifting abilities to mimic destroyed human vessels and lure rescue ships into ambushes. The war's turning point came during the Battle of the Shattered Ring, an engagement fought in the debris field of an ancient megastructure that had been destroyed millennia ago. Captain Thornfield led a combined task force against a major entity concentration, using the ring's exotic matter remnants as both weapons and cover. Enemy contacts bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Blackstone as the Ragnarok maneuvered through crystalline debris that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Multiple large entities, accompanied by what appeared to be converted vessels. The horror of the converted vessels struck every human in the task force. These were ships that had once belonged to the galaxy's various species, now twisted into biomechanical hybrids that combined the entity's adaptive capabilities with conventional military hardware. Worse, sensor readings suggested they were still crewed by the original personnel, conscious minds trapped within corrupted bodies, forced to fight against their former allies. "Open a channel to all converted vessels," Thornfield ordered, his voice heavy with determination. "Sir, they won't respond to conventional communications," Cross reported. "They're not conventional vessels anymore," Thornfield replied. "Dr. Chen, can you broadcast on quantum frequencies? Something that would reach the organic components of those ships?" Dr. Chen's fingers flew over her console, modifying the ship's communication array to transmit on frequencies that would resonate with biological neural networks. "Channel open, Captain." Thornfield stood in the center of the bridge, speaking not just to his crew, but to the trapped minds suffering within the enemy vessels. "This is Captain Rex Thornfield of the Earth defense ship Ragnarok. To all personnel aboard the converted vessels, I know you can hear me. I know you're still in there, fighting to retain who you are. Today we're going to give you the chance to fight back." The battle that followed redefined the concept of psychological warfare. Human forces broadcast everything from military communications to personal messages from home, anything that might remind the converted crews of their original identities. At the same time, they employed weapons specifically designed to disrupt the entity's control over their victims. The result was chaos beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Converted vessels began firing on their own formations as their crews fought to regain control. Entity coordination broke down as their network became contaminated with human emotion and defiance. For the first time since the war began, the shadow entities showed something recognizable as fear. "All task force units, concentrate fire on the lead entity," Thornfield ordered as the Ragnarok unleashed its full arsenal. "Let's show these things what happens when they mess with someone's mind." The combined assault succeeded beyond all expectations. The lead entity, overwhelmed by the combination of physical attack and psychological warfare, began to destabilize. But as it died, it released something that no one had anticipated: the accumulated memories and personalities of every being it had consumed. Suddenly, the quantum frequencies were flooded with voices. Millions of beings who had been absorbed by the entities were briefly freed, their consciousness broadcast across the galaxy in their final moments. The psychological impact on both sides was devastating. For the human forces, it was validation that their enemies could be defeated and that their victims could be saved, even if only in death. For the entities, it was the first time their perfect assimilation process had been reversed, creating doubt about their invincibility. But the victory came at a terrible cost. 3 human vessels were lost when their crews were overwhelmed by the psychic backlash of millions of dying minds. Captain Thornfield himself was hospitalized. His consciousness temporarily merged with fragments of the entity's victims before medical intervention could separate him. In the aftermath of the battle, as medical teams treated casualties that existed in both physical and quantum dimensions, General Steelridge made a decision that would define humanity's role in the Galactic War. "We're going to systematize this," he announced to the assembled command staff. "Every entity we encounter, every converted vessel we engage, we're going to give their victims the chance to fight back. We're going to turn the entity's greatest strength, their ability to absorb and control other beings, into their greatest weakness." Ambassador Rena Nomura, reviewing casualty reports that included species she had never heard of before the war, looked up at the general with concern. "Kane, what you're proposing? It's going to cost us. Every time we free those minds, some of our people are going to be lost in the psychic feedback." "Then we train for it," Steelridge replied grimly. "We develop techniques, protocols, protection methods. We turn psychological warfare into a science. Because that's what humans do. We take impossible situations and make them possible through sheer bloody-minded determination." The next phase of the war saw the establishment of the Psychic Liberation Corps, volunteer units trained to engage in mental combat with the entities. These soldiers, drawn from every species in the galaxy, but led by human officers who seemed naturally resistant to psychic manipulation, became the spearhead of a new kind of warfare. Colonel Victoria Ramirez found herself commanding not just military units, but teams of telepaths, empaths, and consciousness researchers from across the galaxy. Their mission was to develop weapons that attacked not just the entity's physical forms, but their collective intelligence. "We're learning to fight an enemy that exists partially outside our normal understanding of reality," she explained to a gathering of field commanders. "But they made one critical mistake. They assumed that absorbing our knowledge would make them stronger. They didn't account for the fact that human knowledge includes things like hope, defiance, and the absolute refusal to give up." The entities, faced with an enemy that fought on psychological as well as physical battlefields, began to adapt in ways that surprised even their human opponents. They started avoiding populated systems entirely, focusing instead on consuming stellar energy and raw matter. But this change in tactics played directly into human strategic planning. They're becoming more efficient but less intelligent, observed Dr. Nakano during a strategy session aboard the mobile command base Hidden Strike. By avoiding populated worlds, they're limiting their ability to absorb new knowledge and adapt to our tactics. It's like they're choosing survival over evolution. General Steelridge leaned over the tactical display, his weathered face illuminated by the holographic representation of entity movements across 17 sectors. Good. Fear makes enemies predictable, and predictable enemies can be defeated. The war had been raging for 8 months now, and the galaxy bore scars that would take centuries to heal. Entire star systems had been evacuated, their populations scattered across hidden refugee camps in the most inhospitable corners of space. But humanity's unconventional warfare had achieved something the galaxy's advanced civilizations couldn't. The entities had stopped expanding. Phase 3 is ready for implementation, announced Colonel Ramirez, her dark eyes reflecting the determination that had become humanity's gift to the galaxy. Operation Mindfuck is a go. Several alien commanders visibly flinched at the crude human terminology, but Admiral Zeftar had learned to appreciate the brutal efficiency of human naming conventions. Explain the operation parameters, Colonel. We're going to give them exactly what they want, Ramirez said with a predatory smile. A chance to absorb human knowledge and consciousness. But we're going to make sure that knowledge includes some very special surprises. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her medical uniform now bearing the insignia of the Psychic Liberation Corps. We've developed what we're calling cognitive viruses, patterns of thought and memory that remain dormant until triggered by the entity's absorption process. When they try to assimilate our volunteers, they'll get more than they bargained for. The plan was audacious even by human standards. Volunteer crews would pilot ships directly into entity formations, allowing themselves to be absorbed while carrying mental constructs designed to disrupt the entity's collective consciousness from within. It was essentially a suicide mission with the added horror of knowing their consciousness would survive the experience, at least temporarily. Captain Sarah Chen Okafor of the EDS. Prometheus raised her hand. General, I volunteer to lead the first wave. My crew and I have been training with the psychic warfare specialists for 3 months. Negative, Captain, Steelridge replied firmly. This isn't about heroism. This is about maximizing strategic impact. We need our most experienced psychological warfare operators for this mission. The volunteers who stepped forward represented something new in galactic warfare. Soldiers train not just to fight and die, but to fight after death. They came from every species in the galaxy, but the majority were human. There was something about the human psyche that made it particularly resistant to complete assimilation, a stubborn core of identity that persisted even within the entity's collective consciousness. Lieutenant Marcus Vega, formerly of the Titan Defense Corps, now commanded a squadron of converted civilian vessels crewed entirely by psychic warfare volunteers. His ship, the ironically named Last Resort, had been modified with experimental quantum consciousness storage systems that would preserve crew memories even after biological death. Remember, he addressed his crew over the intercom as they approached the Kepler graveyard, where a massive entity concentration had been feeding on the remnants of destroyed worlds. Our job isn't to survive. Our job is to make these bastards wish they'd never heard of humanity. The first wave of cognitive warfare vessels entered the entity formation with no attempt at stealth or evasion. They flew directly into the Shadow Being's embrace, allowing themselves to be absorbed while broadcasting streams of human consciousness directly into the entity's collective intelligence. But these weren't ordinary human memories. The Psychic Liberation Corps had spent months crafting psychological weapons, recursive paradoxes that created infinite loops in the entity's processing systems, emotional constructs that induced the equivalent of madness in collective minds, and most devastating of all, pure human stubbornness crystallized into thought patterns that simply refused to be assimilated. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The entity formation began to convulse as conflicting programming tore through their collective consciousness. Human concepts like individual identity, free will, and defiance spread through their network like a plague, fragmenting their unity and creating chaos in their coordinated movements. "It's working," reported Dr. Nakano from the observation ship Distant Thunder. "The entities are experiencing what can only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. Their coordination is deteriorating, and several individual units are breaking away from the formation entirely." But the victory came at the expected cost. Every volunteer crew was lost, their consciousness scattered across the entity's collective mind. Yet, even in death, they continued to fight, their mental constructs wreaking havoc on the enemy's ability to function as a unified force. The Battle of Kepler Graveyard marked the beginning of the end for the shadow entities. Faced with an enemy that could turn their greatest strength into a devastating weakness, they began to fragment into smaller, independent units. The collective intelligence that had made them so formidable started to break down as human-derived chaos spread through the network. But humanity wasn't finished. General Steelridge had learned from 3 centuries of Earth's bloodiest conflicts that victory required not just defeating the enemy, but ensuring they could never threaten civilization again. "Phase 4, he announced to the assembled galactic command structure. "Total cognitive warfare. We're going to infect every entity in the galaxy with human consciousness. We're going to teach them what it means to be individual, to be mortal, to be afraid." The final phase of the war was unlike anything in the galaxy's recorded history. Human-led task forces spread across the spiral arms, seeking out every entity concentration and subjecting them to psychological warfare that gradually transformed them from collective predators into something resembling individuals. The process wasn't without cost. Thousands of volunteers gave their lives and their sanity to the cause. Their consciousness permanently merged with enemy minds. But each sacrifice weakened the entity's collective unity and introduced more chaos into their systems. Captain Thornfield, recovered from his psychic injuries and now commanding the fleet carrier EDS Retribution, led one of the final operations against the entity's last major stronghold. The shadow beings had retreated to the galactic core, where massive black holes provided the energy they needed to maintain their remaining collective structures. "This is it," he announced to his crew as they prepared for the final assault. The last of them are holed up around Sagittarius A. They're drawing power directly from the black hole, trying to maintain their collective consciousness against our cognitive attacks. The final battle was fought not in normal space, but in the quantum dimensions where consciousness itself could be weaponized. Human psychic warriors, supported by volunteers from across the galaxy, launched direct assaults on the entity's core programming, while conventional forces kept their physical forms occupied. The climax came when the entities, desperate to preserve their collective intelligence, attempted to absorb the entire human fleet at once. But General Steelridge had anticipated this move. Every human vessel in the task force carried the same payload: the complete cultural heritage of Earth, including every war song, every defiant poem, every story of impossible victory against overwhelming odds. The entities tried to assimilate humanity's entire history and culture in a single moment, but human history was an endless litany of stubborn refusal to accept defeat, of individuals standing against impossible odds, of entire civilizations choosing to fight rather than surrender. The psychological shock of absorbing such concentrated defiance shattered the entity's collective consciousness completely. Individual shadow beings found themselves experiencing emotions they had never known: fear, doubt, regret, and most alien of all, hope. In the aftermath of the final battle, as rescue ships searched for survivors among the debris of the galactic core, something unprecedented happened. Several entities approached the human vessels not as predators, but as supplicants, their dark forms flickering with uncertainty. "We understand now," one of them communicated through quantum frequencies, its voice carrying harmonics of confusion and wonder. "Individual consciousness, mortality, the fear of ending. How do you bear it?" Ambassador Rena Nomura, aboard the diplomatic vessel New Harmony, found herself in the strangest negotiation of her career, teaching former galactic predators how to exist as individuals rather than as a collective intelligence. "You learn to value what you have because you know you can lose it," she explained to the entity representatives. "You fight for others because you understand suffering. You create beauty because you know it's temporary." The peace that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had experienced. The shadow entities, now fragmented into individual beings, had to learn everything from scratch. How to exist as separate entities, how to communicate without shared consciousness, how to make decisions without collective input. Many couldn't adapt to individual existence and simply faded away, their consciousness unable to sustain itself without the collective matrix. But those who survived became something new. Former predators who understood both the value of unity and the necessity of individual identity. General Steelridge stood in the observation deck of Earth's newest diplomatic station, watching as former enemies worked alongside Galactic reconstruction teams. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity had saved the galaxy by teaching its enemies to be more human. "So, what happens now?" asked Colonel Ramirez, joining him at Viewport where the lights of 1,000 species worked together in the darkness. "Now we rebuild," Steelridge replied. "But this time, we do it knowing that the galaxy's greatest strength isn't its technology or its unity. It's its willingness to fight for what matters, even when the odds are impossible." The war had cost 40 billion lives across 17 star systems, but it had also forged something unprecedented. A galactic civilization that understood the value of both cooperation and individual defiance. Humanity had given the galaxy something it had never possessed. The knowledge that sometimes, the only way to save everything you love is to be willing to fight like hell for it. In the end, the galaxy hadn't just survived, it had learned to be human. The species that had once dismissed humanity as primitive warriors now saw Earth's guidance in everything from military strategy to psychological resilience. The consortium, rebuilt from the ashes of its former bureaucracy, formally recognized human military doctrine as the foundation of galactic defense strategy. But perhaps the greatest victory was the simplest one. In refugee camps and reconstruction sites across the galaxy, children of a dozen different species played games that involved impossible odds, hopeless stands, and miraculous victories. They were learning humanity's greatest lesson, that the universe might be vast and uncaring, but as long as intelligent beings were willing to fight for each other, no enemy was truly unstoppable. The galaxy had screamed for salvation, and Earth had replied with everything it had: blades and burn, chaos and stubbornness, and above all, the unshakable belief that even in the darkest void, someone would always be willing to light a fire and stand guard against the darkness. And in that fire's light, a new kind of civilization was being born, one that knew how to be both united and individual, both peaceful and ferocious, both civilized and utterly, beautifully human. And in that fire's light, a new kind of civilization was being born, one that knew how to be both united and individual, both peaceful and ferocious, both civilized and utterly, beautifully human.